My name is Deirdre-siobhan Dillon and I ran in the 2024 local elections in County Offaly, Ireland. I want to comment on an article posted on the 16th of March 2026 on the eve of St. Patrick's Day by Breaking News, owned by the Irish Times, on statements made by a Micheál Martin presenting himself as the Taoiseach Prime Minister of the state in Ireland, but had behind him the EU flag in the centre, proving he was not representing the Irish people, but representing the unelected European Commission, who is now implicated in undisputed evidence of involvement in vote rigging. While I do not want to bore you about what fake Irish politicians are babbling on about, there is serious implications through serious crime that is very likely to affect you, your family, your grandchildren, your finances, your basic freedoms, and very likely to lead to civil unrest in the future. On this first point, Micheál Martin's new media regulator was brought in not only to censor Irish people, but apparently everybody else in the world too. This due to the social media companies being based out of Dublin, with the censorship world superpower organisation named Commission na Man, which was set up in March 2023, but was preceded by the foundational EU Digital Services Act 2022 the previous year, and that being without consultation and without consent during the COVIDian terror years. We verified this latter fact of the convenient lack of consultation with the public and lack of consent with all the MEPs by email and registered post, all of who were in the European Parliament at the time, and also with the European Parliament offices in Dublin. Seemingly concerned American politicians, through the House of the Judiciary Committee, published an extensive report in February on how the European Commission, through the Digital Services Act and its proxy Commission na Man, were directing big tech social media to censor public opinion across the Western world and interfere in elections and promote the European Commission's preferred candidates. In their document titled Foreign Censorship Threat Part 2. On page 114, quote, most major technology platforms have their European headquarters in Dublin, making the outcome of Irish elections particularly important to the European Commission's tech agenda. For the same reason, Ireland's media regulator, the Commission na Man, is one of the most powerful in the world. Both the Commission and the Irish regulator engaged with platforms ahead of Ireland's 2024 parliamentary elections and 2025 presidential election, and Irish officials have noted how they work closely with the Commission in the enforcement of the DSA, the Digital Services Act. Due to the discoveries by the investigators for the Judiciary House Committee, it points to the elections in Ireland and other European countries have been rigged at least since 2024. From an Irish perspective, this is 4 most recent elections affected: the local plus Euro elections, followed by the general election and most recent presidential election. As a consequence, Irish people do not have any lawfully elected representatives and only individuals selected by the European Commission pretending to represent the Irish people. Other things to keep in mind from the above is sadly that we have discovered through making direct contact through phone and registered letters with the Committee on the Judiciary, also to the US Ambassador in Dublin, Edward Walsh, that the US interest in this was not based purely on the interests of Americans or Europeans' freedom of expression and right to have fair and lawful elections. But their interests appears to be based on a selfish and jealous interest in being the only ones to control the aforementioned freedom of expression through the US-owned social media platforms. They are most certainly not the heroes that some would like to believe. This essentially is a war to control, not a war to attain fairness or freedom. The Americans, knowing about the European Commission rigging elections, still welcomed same-said politicians for a free holiday at the expense of the Irish people to fake celebrate St. Patrick's Day in America. If the Americans had genuine concern for the Irish people, they would have directed those flights to Guantanamo Bay. Also, you may or may not be shocked to know that the unlawfully set up censorship superpower Commerson the Man, who is involved in European-wide vote rigging, is completely funded by the Irish people and without consent, to the figure likely in the many billions but not fully disclosed amount, with the European Commission being very generous to itself at the Irish taxpayers' expense, but also makes the Irish people unlawfully liable should anyone in Europe or America want to sue for damages for infringement of their own constitutional rights. The European Commission have decided that the Irish people will carry the can for their crimes. This unlawful interference in social media and elections will explain the massive widening disparity between the Irish public and the perceived political representatives, who increasingly accuse the Irish people, for example, of being racist, while politicians overrun the country with their foreign guests, injected en masse without consent, also brought in to unlawfully vote for the criminal politicians, to the point of civil unrest, and the point being that politicians no longer need to be elected by the Irish public and depend only on being selected by the European Commission. This is an increasingly dangerous situation where the apparatus of the state is increasingly weaponised against the native populations across Europe to continue the wicked agenda. Now to the matter of Micheál Martin's incredible claim of having a desire to protect children online. Micheál Martin and his predecessors have repeatedly tried to undermine the rights of families to protect children. From an Irish perspective, Irish law already has all the necessary powers and has had, for many years, powers to protect children both under common law and under statute from so-called online harm. In that the family has a constitutional obligation to protect children at all times, and to fail to do so is a crime of criminal neglect that invites state intervention. According to the current efforts by the so-called government, they are deliberately ignoring the rights and obligations of families to protect children and are instead attempting to possess that power only unto themselves and big tech. Increasingly in the state-funded mainstream media, politicians were making unsubstantiated claims of children being harmed by harmful online content. Recently on the state broadcaster, Deputy Prime Minister Simon Harris claimed that he was, quote, meeting with parents who essentially were criminally neglecting their children by allowing them to access harmful content, by, quote, destroying the mental health and the well-being of their children. What he didn't say was whether or not he had reported them to the Gardaí, police and social services. So to try and verify Harris's claim, and upon further investigation, we sought under FOI 0000912026 evidence that the government was prosecuting parents for criminal neglect of allowing children to access harmful content online, to which there was no record of a single complaint made or a single prosecution acted upon by the state. So now we have evidence that politicians were and are deliberately misleading the public, and there is no evidence of the public asking for online safety measures for their children, only unlawfully state-funded, non-transparent NGOs. This is only an unverifiable myth created by politicians for promotion of their agenda. In the meantime, however, what we do have evidence for is an Irish government minister has admitted to harming children. In their own words, they are allowing children to access in an uncontrolled manner to some of the most heinous material online that we have reported to the DPP. Further, the government are concerned about children under 16 being online, while the Gardaí police are inviting 11 to 12-year-olds to go onto their website to be indoctrinated in the myths of their Garda corporation in Ireland. Age verification via biometrics, even though under 18s in Ireland cannot contract under law. It has been discovered by others that Meta is paying millions in lobbying in America, but the lobby register in Ireland is suspiciously unreflective of same. But this influence is apparent by, for example, Simon Harris constantly pushing the big tech agenda for biometrics. One of the not widely known covert reasons for age verification is for more precise ad targeting of big tech to justify their clients' spend on ads that do not go, for example, on selling pensions to children and games to pensioners. There is also a further nefarious agenda that continues on from the vaccine passports of 2021. That is the digital IDs, and this to please the privately owned corporate central banks as the primary interest party, for as a means to centrally control all financial activity and plug into their social credit score control mechanism to force compliance. From an FOI we submitted, DCCS FOI 2025-0308, we discovered that the Irish taxpayer has paid over €1.3 billion for countrywide IT infrastructure, which would be stolen from the Irish people to the sole benefit of the EU Commission, the politicians they select and big tech. Essentially also theft by stealth to surveil through digital ID to control and oppress the Irish people, a digital prison they even had you pay for yourself. You are paying for your own imprisonment. As a solution to most of the growing problems of big tech working with the European Commission and their fake governments to overreach into the lives of people, would be preventing all proprietary platforms, software and algorithms from secretly black box manipulating social media for any criminal predetermined outcomes. There is a growing movement of using open source platforms and software for transparency and easily auditable by anyone. This would be a death blow to much of the current online corruption of social media, and you will not be hearing about this as a solution from the beneficiaries of fraud, i.e. big tech, the European Commission, or any of the politicians they own. While the powers that should not be most certainly have malicious intent to entrap and control the public, they have not fully succeeded, and in good conscience men and women of goodwill and good faith must increasingly and constantly investigate criminal politicians as the beneficiaries of fraud until they are fairly brought to justice. Thank you for your interest in this matter, which affects all of us who love our freedoms and our nations, hence all of the time and research put in by myself and others concerned. Please see related documents from this video in description below and subscribe for future updates. Thank you.